You requested it, and here it is. Despite the fact that if you're able to make any meme, simply it's probably gonna die. Anyhow, I'd figure I could use this opportunity to introduce some people to Blender and how to use it. There's two ways you can get Blender. You can either go ahead and get it on Steam, or you can get it on their official website. But to avoid hassle, I'd say just use the one on Steam. When your Blender program starts up, it's going to look a little different than this one. I have mine loading up with a custom preset because I usually start off with something like this every time anyhow. Some of the first steps you need to know is that you're going to need a mouse with the scroll wheel, so you can click it and move around. A second big thing to know is that even though in the next update they'll have completely switched this, it is right click to select an object and not left click. Left click will move around this 3D cursor where it'll pivot around this point if you want it to. I'll keep this simple and avoid all the large stuff just so you can do the stuff that you want to do for now, and use this interest to try a new hobby out. For this, we're not going to be using a cube. Images aren't cubes, they're planes. So you can come over here, click plane. One of the problems I had with Blender in the very beginning is that I thought everything would be uneven, but you can usually change everything from the get-go or later on so that it's even anyhow. So like right here, you can get the location of the plane at the bottom left to all be 0, so it's in the middle. You're also going to want to change the x-axis here to 90 so that it's facing you. You could also have it flat down, but this is a much simpler method. In case you don't have this menu on the left, you can just click T, or click this little thing on the left. Now the way to upload the image of Jim Carrey, or whatever image you want, would be to go over here to this little sphere, create a new texture for it, or material to be more accurate, sorry. And then you go into the textures, which is right next to it, and create a new one. When you have your image, you can go down here to image, click open. It usually has desktop bookmarked. You select your file and you click open. The first thing you have to do is unwrap the image, because the way that the image is mapped onto it is based off of UV, which takes the wire mesh, basically the shape of the object, and projects it onto it a way that you want it to. So we can unwrap by pressing U, clicking unwrap. And another issue I had with the beginning of Blender was all these menus. I would accidentally keep opening a bunch of them, and I wouldn't know how to close them. I just kind of discard them off to the side. But one of the things you have to do is you gotta close the smaller ones first by right-clicking the little thing in the middle and joining the area. And it'll give you a little area of which one you want to collapse. Now is where the fun begins. If you change your viewing thing from solid to material, you'll see that your image is there. However, since the image I loaded up is not a perfect square, I'm going to adjust the size of it by clicking S, and then only moving it up and down by pressing Z. Using Z for Z-axis, which is this little blue line you can see here, and you'll have to learn to reference off of. Now, in order to get his face to bend around, you're going to have to create some edge splits. You can do that by doing Control and R, and it creates this little pink line. Wherever you move it is where it's going to try and split it, and you can increase how many splits there will be by moving up and down on the scroll wheel. And when you're done with the edge split, you're going to want to left click to finalize it. You're going to want to create enough splits so that you can have his face move around with more detail. When you start bending it, it'll look more like a polygon mesh, like an old Final Fantasy game. You can avoid that in two different ways. You can go in the modifier tab, which has the giant wrench, click modifier, and scroll down here, the second tab, third one down from the bottom, subdivision surface. What subdivision does is it creates more edge splits to make your mesh look smoother. You can also have it look even smoother by going over here into tools and clicking smooth on the shading tab, so that when you do start moving it around, just for example, you don't see any of the polygons. What I just did there was the proportional editing mode, which you can enable just by clicking it and just clicking enable. It moves the other vertices with it, so you don't have to move them individually. You can change the way it moves. Like this will just bring them all at the same pace. This one will bring it random. But for now I'm just going to use smooth. A second problem you may encounter is the shade here, which is very handy in every other situation except this one. Another thing you could do is create a second light source from underneath to give it some alternate lighting, but for this we're just going to go into the material here and click shadeless. Mesh editing in any program is a bit difficult to explain, but easier to just show or learn by doing it yourself. When you do start editing your mesh, you'll use the G key for moving it around, and you can have it only move in one direction by clicking either Y, Z, or X for their respective axes. Now that you know this information, you can get right to work. Some other helpful little keybinds here would be the shift and mouse, which moves it around the screen without rotating. When using the proportional editor, you can change how many verts it moves with it by using the scroll wheel. But for now, let's create ourselves a Jim Scurvy. Since I don't have the exact save file, I can't create the same exact Jim Scurvy, but I can give you something that's close enough to it. Because when I was just making this, I didn't think it would go anywhere. I thought this would just be a quick little goof or gig. You can do this just by pressing R for rotate. So hopefully your introductory to Blender was simple, quick enough, and you can eventually start learning and getting more interested in the 3D processes. Obviously the information I give you here won't be enough to create something like this, which isn't that complicated, but is still more complicated for beginner users. But this should be a great way to create a new influx of Blender users just because they can apply the things that they want to learn. Since Jim Scurvy was a one-time thing and I was just riding the view wave, consider this the finale of any Jim Scurvy related videos. If you have any other questions or need help with anything, you can either ask in the comments or you can just look online for short little tutorials, because that's how I learned. I find that the best way to learn Blender quick is to think of something that you want to do and looking up tutorials that can help you apply the things that you know you want to do but you don't know how yet, because you don't know the buttons or you don't know the modifiers for it yet. And I can assure you that if you know the required knowledge, you can avoid having to painstakingly do repetitive processes over just with simple modifiers like array. And hopefully you enjoy Blender. Future Blender experiences will be simple and very entertaining.